What if Robert Baratheon killed Rhaegar Targaryen at the Trident and claimed the Iron Throne not out of duty, but with cold ambition, no honor, and no mercy? The waters of the Trident ran red, and the air stank of blood and sweat. Horses screamed. Men shouted. The clash of steel rang out like 1,000 church bells. Robert Baratheon stood at the center of it all. His warhammer was slick with brains and gore. He didn't care. He barely noticed. His eyes were locked on a single man across the field, a silver-haired warrior in black armor, his breastplate inlaid with the sigil of the three-headed dragon, Rhaegar Targaryen. The prince looked almost ethereal under the stormy sky, as if he didn't belong to this world. But Robert didn't see a man. He saw a thief, a traitor, a ghost wearing the face of the one who stole Lyanna. Robert roared, charging through mud and blood. Soldiers scattered. The battlefield bent around them, as if fate itself demanded this meeting. Their weapons clashed, loud and final, like a hammer hitting an anvil. Rhaegar was fast, graceful. He moved like music, flowing from strike to strike with almost no effort. But Robert was a storm, a wall of fury and weight. You took her, Robert bellowed. She came with me willingly. Rhaegar spat back, ducking under a swing. Liar! Steel met steel again. A rain of sparks lit the air. The two men fought like gods. Around them, men died by the dozens, but none dared intervene. They knew this was not their battle. This was something older, something fated, and then it ended. Robert feinted a strike, then reversed his grip and brought his warhammer down hard, right into Rhaegar's chest. The sound was sickening. Bone cracked. Blood burst from the prince's mouth as he collapsed to his knees. "You die here," Robert whispered. Rhaegar tried to speak, but no words came. His mouth moved silent. His eyes went wide as Robert lifted the hammer again. This time, he didn't stop. He brought it down 3 more times, smashing the prince's ribs, face, skull. When it was done, Rhaegar was no longer a man. He was just red pulp and silver hair in the mud. The trident was quiet, and then Robert screamed, not in rage this time, but in victory. In hunger, in claim, the war was not over, but the dragon was dead. The next days moved like a fever dream. Robert didn't weep for Lyanna, not once. His grief had hardened long ago, turned to a knife he carried deep in his gut. She was gone, taken from him. By Rhaegar, by the gods, by fate. He wouldn't grieve anymore, he would conquer. The lords gathered. Stark, Arryn, Tully, all waiting for direction. Robert didn't consult them. He rode ahead to King's Landing with his best men and left the rest behind. Honor was for the dead. Speed was for kings. When they reached the city gates, smoke already curled into the sky. Tywin Lannister had arrived first, his army sacking the capital in the name of the new king. Robert didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He walked through the broken gates, past the charred bodies, the piles of gold and ash. When Sir Jaime Lannister presented him with the body of King Aerys, Robert simply nodded. "Burn him," he said. "And the child?" Someone whispered. "The princess." "The queen." Robert turned. His face, once handsome and full of laughter, was now hard as stone. "No dragons," he said. "Not one. Burn them all." The days that followed were soaked in blood. Elia Martell and her children were already dead, thanks to Tywin's butchers. Robert said nothing. He rewarded Tywin with Casterly Rock and more. The man had done what was necessary. Stannis and Renly flinched. Eddard Stark objected, but Robert cut him off. They were dragons, Ned, not children. They'd grow up wanting vengeance. You'd do the same if you were them. But Ned stared back, quiet and cold. A crack had formed between them, and in that crack, something dark was festering. Robert sat the Iron Throne a week later, sword in hand, crown on brow, Lyanna's memory dead in his heart. The Red Keep smelled of burnt silk and smoke. He didn't mind. He liked it better that way. He passed laws not of peace, but of control. He doubled the taxes on former Targaryen loyalists. He disbanded certain houses. He rewarded cutthroats. He elevated men like Peter Baelish, who whispered of spies and coin and quiet assassinations. Better the knife in the dark than the war in daylight. Robert muttered, and those who questioned him. He silenced them. Some vanished. Some had accidents. Even Jon Arryn, his old mentor, began to keep his distance. The king had changed, and Robert didn't care. In the quiet of his chambers, Robert would sometimes look at the torn petals of the blue winter rose that once sat on Lyanna's grave. He would crush them in his hands. "She should have loved me," he whispered then. He'd drink until he passed out. The realm had a new king, but he wasn't the man they thought he'd be. He wasn't the hero. He was the usurper, and he intended to rule with fire, even if he didn't have dragons. The halls of the Red Keep had changed. Once they echoed with song and silk-draped grace. Now they were filled with armored boots, muffled screams, and the stink of burnt parchment. The Baratheon stag flew high, but its antlers were slick with blood. Lord Eddard Stark stood at the edge of the throne room, his face carved from ice. Robert sat on the iron throne, legs spread wide, wine sloshing in one hand, warhammer resting by the other. He was no longer the proud, laughing warrior Ned remembered. This Robert had grown sharper. He still drank, but not to forget. Now he drank like a man preparing for war, every sip more like fuel than poison. Ned had come to talk sense. But sense had no seat in Robert's court. "You burned the sept," Ned said quietly. Robert didn't look up. A nest of whispers and relics. They prayed for the dragon. Let them burn with him. They were priests, Robert. They were traitors, Ned. Eddard Stark said nothing. He clenched his fists behind his back to keep from shaking. He had marched south for justice, for the realm, not for this. And the children of loyal houses? You've exiled 3 noble families in the past week. Even House Hightower fears you now. Robert finally looked up. Good, let them fear me. It's better than love, Ned. Fear doesn't waver. That wasn't the Robert Eddard knew. The Robert he had followed into war loved fiercely, drank too deeply. But he wasn't cruel, at least not then. Something had snapped at the trident. Maybe it was Lyanna's ghost. Maybe it was the crown. Maybe it was victory. Ned walked the halls that night with Ser Jorah Mormont at his side, an exile's son turned informant. Jorah was one of many now whispering secrets for coin or favor in Robert's shadow court. "The king asks for oaths of loyalty," Jorah said. "Real ones. Signed in blood," Ned's jaw tightened. "And if we don't sign?" Jorah gave him a look. "Ask Lord Estermont, or what's left of him." The court had begun to turn on itself. Lords who questioned Robert too openly were being stripped of titles, or worse. Whispers said that Varys had returned to King's Landing, serving Robert now. The Spider didn't care who ruled, only that he ruled from behind a veil. Even Littlefinger, once a minor lordling, had grown fat off the chaos. He sat near the throne now, always whispering, always smiling, and Ned, he was becoming a relic in his own time. But then late that night, something else changed everything. Benjen Stark arrived, wounded and tired. Riding hard from the Tower of Joy, they spoke in private. "She's gone," Benjen said. "Dead, Ned, but not before." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small, swaddled bundle of parchment and cloth. Inside was a lock of dark hair and a name. Ned stared at it in silence. His breath caught. "A boy?" Benjen nodded. "Her son. Rhaegar's. She begged me to swear to keep him safe. I rode 3 days through Dornish patrols to get here." Ned felt the walls close in. A Targaryen child, the last perhaps. And Robert, this Robert, would kill him without question. He had already ordered every dragon burned. This child would not be spared, no matter Lyanna's blood. Ned ran his hand through his hair. His sister's voice still echoed in his ears. "Promise me, Ned." By dawn, he made his decision. He would claim the boy as his own bastard. No one would question it. He'd name him Jon Snow, a stain on his honor, but a shield for the last spark of the Targaryen flame. Robert must never know, but secrets were already growing. Heavy in King's Landing, Varys was watching Littlefinger, was listening, and someone, perhaps more than one, was feeding Robert tales of disloyalty in the north. Whispers of Stark treason, of cold wolves planning rebellion. In the throne room, Robert sat brooding with Lord Renly at his side. "He's hiding something," Robert muttered. "Who?" Renly asked, frowning. "Stark. He flinches when I speak of the dragons. He looks at me like I'm the enemy." Renly hesitated. Maybe because you're acting like one, Robert glared. He was my brother once. But even brothers can lie, and lies are dangerous in my kingdom. Littlefinger stepped forward with his trademark smirk. Would you like me to watch him, Your Grace? Robert didn't hesitate. Watch him. Watch them all. In the months that followed, Ned left King's Landing, claiming urgent matters in the north. He took the boy with him. Robert allowed it, but he watched. He sent spies. Ravens flew both ways. And though the realm thought it was at peace beneath the surface, it began to rot. The north grew colder. The riverlands grew restless. The Reach seethed at the new taxes. The Lannisters profited in silence, biding their time. And across the narrow sea, a whisper reached the ears of a girl named Daenerys. A whisper that said, "Your brother is dead. Your nephew was never found, but the usurper still lives." The fire was not out, not yet, and in the crypts beneath Winterfell, Ned Stark knelt at Lyanna's tomb. He placed the parchment and her lock of hair beside her. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "But at what cost?" Above, the wind howled through the pines, and in the Red Keep, Robert Baratheon drank from a golden chalice, thinking only of his crown and the war he'd start next. The crown was his. But the realm was bleeding. Winterfell stood strong beneath a cold grey sky, its walls ancient and thick with the weight of history. Snow dusted the rooftops, and the godswood whispered as if it too carried secrets in its bark. But even here in the north where silence reigned, whispers could still kill. Jon Snow was barely 5 when he first asked the question, "Am I a Stark?" Ned had knelt beside him in the godswood, the snow settling gently in his dark curls. His grey eyes, so much like Lyanna's, searched his father's for something more than words. But all Ned could say was the lie he had forged from necessity. "You have Stark blood in you." That is enough. It was not. Not for Jon, and not for the men around him. The Stark name was a crown in the north, and Jon wore only the ashes of it. He was called Snow, and that name followed him like a ghost. Bastard, unworthy, less, yet even as a child, Jon noticed how people looked at him, how Catelyn Stark's smiles froze the moment he entered a room, how Maester Luwin hesitated when speaking of his birth, how Benjen Stark, on rare visits, would glance at Jon with a mix of sorrow and pride. Jon felt it in the bones of Winterfell. He was different. But not because of a name. No, there was something else in him, a fire that didn't belong in the cold. Back in King's Landing, Robert Baratheon ruled like a man sitting on a keg of wildfire. The crown sat heavy on his head, and it had begun to eat at him, piece by piece. His court was no longer made of warriors and friends, but of vipers and liars. Peter Baelish, Varys, Grand Maester Pycelle, even Renly had grown distant, uncomfortable with the king's rages and his thirst for blood. One afternoon, Robert struck a servant boy for simply pouring his wine too slowly. The boy died before the maester could reach him. When Sir Barristan Selmy confronted him later that evening, Robert simply said he was weak. "I'm not." Barristan, ever the honourable knight, said nothing. But in his eyes something changed. The realm had seen tyrants. Mad Aerys, Bloodraven, but Robert was something worse. He was a beloved tyrant, one whose charm had long since rotted behind the eyes. Meanwhile, Lord Jon Arryn sent letters, quiet ones, to the Vale, to Riverrun, even to Dorne. He warned of a king slipping into madness, of a realm ruled by fear, not law. Most lords ignored him. Tywin Lannister smiled from afar, growing fat on tax exemptions. Hoster Tully held his tongue, hoping for calm. But one letter, sent north, reached Winterfell. Eddard Stark read it alone in his solar, the fire crackling beside him. "He is changing, Ned. I do not trust the men around him, and I do not trust what he becomes in the dark. The dragon was mad, but the stag is hungry." It was signed. Jon burned the letter that same night. In the Vale things stirred. Lisa Arryn, now married to Jon, had grown fearful. She whispered of poison in her wine, of Varys watching her every move. She begged her husband to leave King's Landing. Jon refused. "He was my student once, my ward. If I cannot save him, then none can. But even Jon Arryn, Warden of the East, could not stop what was coming. Because Robert was not content with a crown. He wanted a dynasty. He had no heir. Cersei Lannister, his queen, had given him no children. Or so he believed. The truth was, Robert had fathered more bastards than any king before him, but none legitimate. He blamed her. She blamed him. Their marriage was a battlefield of venom and silence. The only warmth in Cersei's life came from her brother, and that warmth was forbidden. But Robert had a plan. He would take a new wife. "She'll be Dornish," he declared one night at council. "Or from the Reach, someone fertile, someone loyal. The Lannister girl is barren and full of poison." Renly's face paled. Varys raised a brow. Littlefinger laughed softly. "My lord," Pycelle muttered, "you cannot simply cast off the queen." Robert stood. "Watch me." Cersei knew. She heard through her spies before the king's words reached her ears, and in her rage a thought bloomed in her mind. A single thought that tasted of smoke and betrayal. Perhaps the dragon was never the enemy. Back in the north, Jon Snow trained with the sword. Sir Roderick taught him, and Jon took to the blade as if born with it in hand. He moved like water, faster than Robb, more focused than Theon. But still the other boys sneered behind his back. Snow, motherless, less than a wolf. Jon heard them. He just didn't care. Not anymore. But he began asking more questions. Quiet ones. About the war. About Rhaegar. About Lyanna. One night he crept into the crypts and found her tomb. The statue stared ahead, stone eyes forever frozen. "Who were you?" he whispered. There was no answer. But in the stillness of the crypt, something inside him stirred, a hunger, a need to know who he was, not a Snow, not a bastard, something else. In the east, across the sea, Viserys Targaryen heard rumors of the king who burned children, of a land soaked in dragon blood, of a bastard in the north with dark hair and Targaryen eyes, and Viserys, ever jealous, ever mad, whispered to his sister, "He stole our kingdom. Dany, but fire remembers, and we are fire, and far to the north, beyond the wall." Old things stirred, the cold grew sharper, the shadows longer, and a raven flew south, black wings carrying warning. But in King's Landing, the Iron Throne sat high and proud, its master drunk on power. Deaf to omens, Robert Baratheon had won his war, but now his war had just begun. The Iron Throne did not forgive weakness. Nor did Robert Baratheon. The crown weighed heavier than ever on his brow, and its silent hunger echoed through the Red Keep like a slow drumbeat. Robert, once a man of passion and laughter, had become a king of paranoia and ambition, hunting shadows and forging legacy from fear. The small council had changed. Lord Jon Arryn now attended less frequently, his cough worsening, his eyes hollow. Sir Barristan still spoke with caution, while Grand Maester Pycelle poured flattery like honey over spoiled bread. Varys said little, but Littlefinger smiled often, and when he smiled people disappeared. It was at one of these cold meetings that Robert spoke plainly. "I will put aside the queen." No hesitation, no warning, just steel in his voice. The chamber went quiet. Even Pycelle flinched. Renly coughed half in disbelief. "You would start another war." Robert shook his head. "No, I end this one. The Lannisters think they own me. That ends now. I will take another wife, one who can give me a true-born son." Littlefinger leaned forward, fingers steepled. "And who would you choose, Your Grace?" Robert grinned. It wasn't warm. Lady Marguerite Tyrell. Gasps circled the room like cold wind. "She's but a girl," Pycelle croaked. "She's fertile," Robert snapped. "And the Tyrells command half the grain of Westeros. They want power. I give them a crown." Varys's voice was soft, smooth as silk. "And the Queen?" Robert's eyes darkened. "She will bend, or she will break." The message was sent. In Highgarden, Lord Mace Tyrell nearly wept from joy. A royal marriage would raise his house to the highest of highs. But in Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister said nothing. Not to his bannermen. Not to his family. He simply began making lists of debts, of enemies, of names. At court, Queen Cersei played the role of the scorned wife well. She smiled at feasts, kissed babies in the street, and danced when asked. But in her chambers, she shattered mirrors, tore tapestries, and cursed Robert's name 1,000 times. It was not heartbreak that consumed her. It was humiliation. He had made her a nothing, a placeholder, a womb he discarded. She turned to Jaime, but even her golden lion had grown distant, haunted by whispers of wildfire and broken oaths. And so Cersei began to write, to Dawn, to Essos, to those who remembered the dragon's fire. Far to the north, in Winterfell, Jon Snow had turned 10. He was lean and fast, with eyes like storms, and a silence that unnerved even his brothers. Robb tried to include him in everything, but there was always a line between them. Not drawn by hate, but by truth. Jon didn't belong, not truly. And then one day he found Ned Stark waiting for him in the Godswood. "You're to leave with Benjen," Ned said. Jon blinked. "To the wall." Ned nodded. "He's taking the black. And you will go too. It's the honorable path." Jon's heart twisted. He didn't protest, not with words, but something in his eyes screamed. "You said I was a Stark," he whispered. "You are," Ned replied, "but not by name." Ned said nothing. That night, Jon visited the crypts. Again, he stood before Lyanna's statue in silence, and for the first time he felt something, not just the weight of the dead, but the pull of legacy. He pressed his hand to the cold stone and he whispered, "Who was I before I was nothing?" But the Godswood held other secrets. Arya had followed Jon, silent as shadow. She'd heard it all, and she had questions now. Questions that would not die. Back in the Vale, Lord Jon Arryn collapsed during dinner. His lips turned blue. His eyes rolled back. He died before he hit the floor. Maester Coleman said it was the cough, a sickness of the lungs. But Lysa Arryn screamed murder, and she was right. A raven flew to King's Landing with the news. Robert did not mourn. Not truly. He was weak, he muttered. Couldn't handle the fire, but Ned Stark mourned. When the raven reached Winterfell, he sat alone for hours, the letter in his hand. Jon was dead, his oldest friend, the one who knew the truth, the one who had protected it with his silence. Then another raven came, from King's Landing, a royal summons. Robert wanted Ned to take Jon's place as Hand of the King. It was bait, wrapped in brotherhood and duty, but bait all the same. Wrapped in brotherhood and duty, but bait all the same. Catelyn begged him to refuse. The north was safe. The south was poison, but Ned remembered Lyanna. He remembered Jon Arryn. He remembered the child he had raised in secret, and he knew the day would come when secrets would burn. Far across the sea, Viserys Targaryen met with a Khal, a trade of dragons for armies, and Daenerys, frightened and quiet, looked back once more at the burning horizon and said, "The usurper will die." In King's Landing, Robert drank. He stared at the throne, as if it might kill him in his sleep, and he whispered, slurring through his cups, "I burned the dragons, I buried the wolves, but the realm still bites. A kingdom without heirs, a throne without loyalty, and a realm balanced on lies." The storm was coming again, and this time there would be no honor left to save it. The gates of King's Landing creaked open under a pale sun. The city stank of sweat, piss, and smoke, the scent of power left to rot. But Lord Eddard Stark rode through them with his head high, cloak billowing in northern grey. He had not come for glory, he had come for duty. The journey south had taken weeks, and his heart had grown heavier with each mile. Every bird from the capital carried new poison, Tyrell banners being sewn in gold, Lannister soldiers massing near the Crownlands, Cersei silent and smiling. And Robert had stopped writing altogether. When Ned entered the Red Keep, the old halls whispered like ghosts. He remembered this place as a battlefield, Aerys's throne room strewn with bodies, the iron steps soaked in blood. But now it was worse. Now it was quiet, too quiet. They met in the council chamber as if they were still friends. Robert was heavier, red-eyed, and half-drunk before the midday sun. "Ned!" he roared, rising to embrace him. "Gods, it's been too long." Ned accepted the embrace. But the man who held him no longer felt like a brother. He smelled of wine, ash, and cold steel. Robert waved away the courtiers and poured 2 cups. "You'll serve as hand, not because I ask, but because the realm needs it." "I need it. Jon is gone. You're the only man I trust." Ned met his gaze. "You don't trust anyone, Robert." "Not anymore." Robert laughed too loud. "And maybe I shouldn't, but you have honor." "That'll be enough." Ned didn't answer. "Not yet." The council, as always, reeked of rot. Littlefinger greeted Ned with mock affection. Varys bowed with honeyed words. Pycelle wheezed through half-truths and historical context, but the room's air changed when Cersei entered. She didn't bow. She didn't smile. She simply stood across from Ned, cold as stone. "Lord Stark," she said softly. "It's been a long time." "Your Grace," Ned replied with a stiff nod. Behind her stood Jaime, golden, smug, and silent. They were a wall, a pair forged in arrogance and blood. Ned felt the danger immediately, and Cersei felt his hesitation like a blade she might one day twist. The matters of state were bleak. The crown was drowning in debt over 6 million dragons owed, most of it to the Lannisters. The Tyrell marriage had not yet taken place, but the papers were drawn. Robert would wed Margaery before the year's end, regardless of her age. "She bleeds, doesn't she?" Robert had said with a shrug. "That's enough for me." Ned felt sick, but worse was the quiet order that followed. "Find me the rest of the dragon spawn," Robert muttered one night. "There's still one somewhere, I can feel it. Rhaegar's get, his brat. I want his head on a spike before the wedding." Ned froze. He looked at Robert with pure disbelief. "They're dead," he lied. "All of them." Robert shook his head. "Not that one, the boy. I know you heard the rumors. He lives somewhere." Ned's hand clenched. "I swore to you," Robert continued, voice low and vicious. "No dragons left alive." "I mean it." In the shadows, Varys listened. And Varys knew. The spider always knew. At Castle Black, Jon Snow faced another kind of truth. The wall was not what he expected. It wasn't glory or honor. It was filth, cold, despair, and men, murderers, thieves, bastards like him, who had no loyalty but to survival. Benjen Stark had tried to guide him, but even he had vanished now. Gone on a ranging and weeks overdue, Jon stood alone among strangers, trying to find purpose in a place that had none. But then the old ranger, Corin Halfhand, said something that pierced the silence. "You're not like the rest. You feel it, don't you?" Jon frowned. "Feel what?" "The world changing, the cold creeping in. Something is coming, and we're not ready." Meanwhile, in the Riverlands, fire rose. Lord Hoster Tully had refused to raise arms for the crown after Jon Arryn's death. He claimed illness. In truth, he feared what the realm had become, but his vassal, Lord Blackwood, spoke too freely about Robert's tyranny. He called the king a bastard crowned by slaughter, and for that Sir Gregor Clegane was sent to deliver a message. The Blackwood lands were burned. The lord's eldest son was strung from a tree, the women raped, the fields salted. The realm called it justice, but whispers called it what it was, a warning. Back in the Red Keep, Ned began to see the cracks. He found evidence, a line of bastards, all with black hair and Baratheon blood, and none of them legitimate. He found ledgers manipulated by Littlefinger, draining royal funds for private loans. And worst of all, he found a letter in Jon Arryn's chambers. It was a name, just a name. Snow, the spider, had found it too. Cersei confronted him one evening in the gardens. "You're searching for secrets. That will kill you," she said. "I'm searching for truth. Truth died at the Trident," she whispered. Robert buried it with Rhaegar. Her voice changed then, sadder, quieter. "You should have taken the crown, Lord Stark. You'd have made a better tyrant than my husband." That same night, a raven from the Eyrie arrived. Lysa Arryn had fled with her son. She accused the Lannisters of poisoning Jon Arryn. Robert laughed when he read it. "Coward woman. I gave her a castle and she returns with slander." But Ned said nothing because he believed her, and now he was trapped. In the capital, the common folk cheered for Margaery's arrival. They shouted her name and threw flowers. But in the alleys, the poor muttered of burning villages, missing girls. and a king who drank while they starved. And in the Red Keep, Robert drank more each night, every cup another shield against guilt, against ghosts, against Lyanna, because no matter how loud the songs, the past refused to stay buried. And far across the sea, in a tent full of horse lords, a silver-haired girl placed her hand on her belly, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. "I'm with child," Daenerys whispered. Viserys grinned. "A dragon reborn." It rained for 3 straight days in King's Landing, not a cleansing rain, but thick, heavy sheets of water that turned the streets to rivers and the air to rot. They called it summer rain, but to Lord Eddard Stark it felt like a funeral. The city was drowning, and he was beginning to realize he might drown with it. He sat in the Tower of the Hand, the letter from Lysa Arryn open in front of him. The ink was smudged, but the words were clear. "They killed my husband. The Lannisters. You are not safe." He believed her, but believing didn't change the noose tightening around his throat. Littlefinger visited that morning, smiling like always, pretending to be helpful. "You've been asking about bastards," he said casually. "What a strange hobby for a man with so many secrets of his own." Ned didn't flinch. "Tell me what you know." Littlefinger raised a brow. "I know the king has more than a dozen, all with his black hair and wild blood. But none from the Queen, oddly enough." He leaned in closer. "And I know you're asking about Jon Snow. Why now, I wonder?" Ned's jaw clenched. Littlefinger always said too much, but never the thing you needed most. That afternoon, Ned met with Grand Maester Pycelle. "Tell me about Jon Arryn's last days." The old man squirmed. "He was sick, Lord Stark, lungs full of fluid. It comes with age." "He wasn't that old. He had enemies. Did he say anything?" "Anything strange?" Pycelle hesitated, then muttered, "The seed is strong." Ned's blood went cold. It was the same phrase he found scribbled in Jon Arryn's journal. Over and over again, "The seed is strong." That night, Ned put it all together. Every bastard he found bore the same features: black hair, strong jaw, blue eyes. Every child except the ones Cersei claimed as Roberts, Joffrey, Tommen, Myrcella, golden-haired, green-eyed, Lannister from the bone out. Not Roberts, not Baratheon at all. Not Roberts, not Baratheon at all. Treason lay in front of him like an open wound. If Robert knew, he'd kill them all. But if he didn't, Cersei sat beside the throne. Her children wore stolen crowns, and Jon Snow, the boy he raised, was the one with the true blood of dragons. The truth was a blade, and Ned held it by the edge. He arranged a meeting, secret, urgent. Cersei came without guards. Dressed in black, her eyes unreadable. "You should run," Ned said quietly. She laughed. "You're the second man to tell me that. I know your children aren't Roberts. I know they're Jaime's." "Then do your duty," she whispered. "Robert will kill them, all of them. Even Myrcella. He'll try." There was no fear in her. "Only fire. Leave, take your children. Go far away. Across the sea if you must. And if I refuse, then I will tell the king. I'll do what's right." She leaned in closer. "When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle ground." And then she left him alone with the rain. But Ned Stark was still a man of honor, so he wrote a letter to Stannis Baratheon, the king's true heir by law. He explained everything: the bastards, the lie, the blood. He sealed it with wax and sent it north with a rider sworn to House Stark. And then he went to Robert. But Robert was not in the mood for truths. The king lay in bed, groaning in pain, his skin pale and clammy. He had gone hunting 2 days earlier, drunk, angry. And now he lay dying. "A boar," Renly said. "It gored him, right through the gut." But Varys, always quiet, said nothing. And Ned, watching the king writhe in pain, wondered what had really happened in those woods. Robert was dying, and with his last breath he asked Ned to write his will. "Make it so. My heir will rule until he comes of age." He never said Joffrey's name. "Only my heir." Ned replaced the words silently. He wrote "rightful heir" and signed his name with a shaking hand. The next morning, Robert Baratheon, usurper, king, and breaker of the realm, was dead, and the vultures began to circle. Joffrey was crowned that afternoon. Too fast, too clean. Renly urged Ned to act quickly, to take the boy into custody and name Stannis king. But Ned refused. There must be law, not murder. Renly fled the city that same night, and by the next morning Ned was surrounded. Littlefinger came to him in the Tower of the Hand, quiet as a snake. "You should have taken the boy. I told you. I won't shed the blood of children." Littlefinger smiled. "Then yours will be spilled instead." Ned grabbed his sword. But it was too late. Gold cloaks flooded the hall, and Sir Jaime Lannister stepped forward. "You brought this on yourself." "Stark!" Ned was thrown in the black cells. The realm above descended into chaos. Cersei ruled through Joffrey, her puppet king screaming for heads. The bastards Robert left behind were hunted one by one. The letter to Stannis never arrived. The man carrying it was found hanging from a tree outside Maidenpool, in the north. Robb Stark received no word, no warning, only silence, and in the Vale, Lysa Arryn locked her gates, taking no sides. Across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen felt her child kick for the first time, and whispered, "You will sit the Iron Throne, my son." Not theirs. In the cold of the dungeon, Eddard Stark sat in chains. He thought of Lyanna, of Jon, of what the realm had become. He had tried to save it, but now the realm would burn. The North remembers. When the Raven arrived in Winterfell with no seal and too few words, Catelyn Stark read the message aloud only once before her voice cracked. "Lord Eddard has been imprisoned for treason." Robb Stark stood in stunned silence, his breath short, his fists trembling. He was 17, barely a man, but the moment those words left his mother's mouth, he became a wolf with his father in chains, and the lion's teeth closing around their family. He turned to Theon, to Maester Luwin, to Ser Rodrik. There was no debate, no pause. "Call the banners." In the cold halls of Winterfell, the drums of war echoed for the first time in nearly 20 years. The great houses of the North responded not just out of loyalty, but vengeance. The Umbers, Carstarks, Mormonts, and Boltons rode. By week's end, Robb Stark had 20,000 men behind him and fury in his heart. "I'll bring my father home," he told his bannermen, "or I'll bring King's Landing to its knees." Meanwhile, at Castle Black, Jon Snow trained harder than ever. But something gnawed at him, some tug beneath the surface. He'd felt it for weeks. Then the Raven came. It bore no message, just a stark sigil in black wax. He found Sam that night by the fire. "They've taken my father," Jon said. "I don't know why, but I know it's wrong. What will you do?" Jon didn't answer, but he stared at the gate in the wall for a long, long time. In King's Landing, the realm prepared for a royal execution. Joffrey Baratheon, now crowned and clad in red velvet, demanded a display of strength. He confessed. The boy king shouted in court. "He wanted to steal my throne. He spoke treason." Eddard Stark had indeed confessed, but only under the weight of threats. Cersei had promised mercy. The black cells had broken his body. But worse, the queen had Sansa say what we tell you. "And your daughter lives," she whispered, and so Ned broke his honor. He stood before the realm and told a lie. "I conspired to place Stannis Baratheon on the throne. I betrayed the king." Joffrey smiled like a serpent. "Let him live," Cersei whispered urgently. But Joffrey rose and declared, "Bring me his head." In that moment, the realm snapped. Sir Ilyn Payne swung the sword, and Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, Hand of the King, Keeper of Secrets, was gone. The crowd screamed. Arya Stark, hidden in the throng, watched her father die. Her blade clutched tight in her palm. The girl with no mercy was born that day, at River Run. Robb received the news from a trembling messenger. The parchment slipped from his fingers. His knuckles turned white. He stood before his bannermen and said only 5 words. "We march. We don't stop." In Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister heard of the execution and smirked. "Fool boy," he said of Joffrey. "Now the North will never kneel," Cersei screamed when she heard the same. "You were told to spare him." But Joffrey only shrugged. "I am the king." Cersei slapped him hard. He didn't cry. He just stared at her with something cold, something darker than even Robert ever had. She saw it then. Her son. He was not a boy. He was a monster. In the dungeons of the Red Keep, Sansa Stark wept. Her father was dead, her mother and brothers gone, her wolf executed, her dreams crushed. But deep in that silence, something in her hardened. Bent, but not broken. She bowed her head when Joffrey passed, but her eyes burned. Across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen gave birth to a stillborn child, a twisted thing. A dragon-shaped corpse. The Khalasar broke. Viserys was long dead. Her child was dead, but the fire was not. She walked into Drogo's pyre that night, and when the flames faded, she stood unburnt. 3 living dragons at her feet. Fire and blood had returned to the world, and across the narrow sea, the usurper's throne began to shake. Back in the north, ravens flew by the dozen. War had begun. Robb's army clashed with Jaime Lannister's host near the Whispering Wood and won. The Kingslayer was captured, dragged in chains before Robb Stark. Robb didn't smile. He didn't boast. He only said, "You'll have a cell. And when I'm done, you'll see the justice your family denied my father." In the Riverlands, lords began to rise. In the Vale, Lisa closed her gates again. In Dorne, Prince Doran Martell sent ravens, quiet, careful, but in the storm, they remembered Elia and waited for their chance to avenge her. In King's Landing, Cersei drank more each day. Jaime was gone. The king was dead, and Joffrey was growing more unstable by the hour, but the one thing she still controlled was the truth. Jon Snow still lived. And somewhere, the last ember of Rhaegar's line still burned in the north. If Jon's parentage was ever revealed, her children would be called bastards. Her crown, her house, everything, it would be torn to ash. So she sent for Varys. "Find the boy," she said, "and if he learns the truth, kill him." In the shadows of Castle Black, Jon Snow sat by the fire. The storm howled outside. He stared at the letter again, unsigned, but sealed in black wax, and on the edge of his mind, words echoed like a ghost's whisper. "You are the last light in the dark. You are the last light in the dark." They crowned him in the night. The great lords of the north gathered in the hall at River Run, still muddy from war, bloodied from the Whispering Wood. Greywater Watch, Bear Island, Carhold, White Harbor, all their banners lowered together. And when they rose again, they rose for Robb Stark, a boy of 17, a wolf of war, the son of the man they butchered in chains. Great Jon Umber stood and roared, "The king in the north!" The cry caught flame like wildfire. "The king in the north! The king in the north!" And Robb, though his eyes still carried grief, nodded solemnly. "I did not ask for a crown," he said, "but I will wear it. Not for glory, not for power, for vengeance, for justice, for Ned Stark." And the realm trembled. In King's Landing, Cersei sat in silence. The council was splintered. Pycelle muttered nonsense. Littlefinger kept to himself, and Varys spoke less than usual. Even Sir Barristan had left court, disgusted by Joffrey's madness and Ned's execution. The Iron Throne had become a powder keg, and her son, her king, was holding the torch. Joffrey smiled too much, hurt too easily, ordered floggings and beatings with a casual flick of the hand. His favorite amusement was dragging Sansa Stark to court, forcing her to kneel, beg, and smile. Cersei watched it all unfold, knowing she could not stop him, only redirect the chaos, and now there was Jon Snow to worry about. Varys returned with nothing but riddles. "He lives, my queen," he said softly, "and the blood in his veins is not that of a Snow." Cersei's fingers clenched around her cup. "If he speaks, my son is no king." Varys raised a brow. "And if he dies, your grace, the north may burn even hotter. They loved Eddard Stark. They may worship his son." Cersei stood. "Let them worship ashes." At Castle Black, Jon Snow stood at a crossroads. Sam had seen the letter. He didn't understand it, not fully, but he understood enough. "You're not just Ned Stark's son, are you?" Jon stared into the fire. "No, I'm his sister's, and Rhaegar's." Jon had put the pieces together on his own. Lyanna's whispers. The way Ned never looked him in the eye when asked about his mother. The name scribbled in old books, Snow, not because of bastardy, but because of hiding. He didn't weep. He didn't tremble. He just asked, "What does that make me?" And the fire answered in silence. The wall loomed taller that night. He wrote a letter, one line only. "I am the sword in the darkness, but I am not yours to command." And before dawn, Jon Snow vanished into the cold. In the east, across the narrow sea, dragons flew for the first time in over a century. Daenerys Targaryen led her Khalasar of broken men and freed slaves through the red waste. Where she walked, the sky trembled. Where she spoke, armies listened. Her heart, once soft, had turned to glass. She fed tyrants to her dragons, and her whisper grew, "Fire and blood, fire and blood, fire and blood." When word of Eddard Stark's death reached her, she did not mourn. She smiled. "The usurper is dead," she said. "His son is weak. His queen is drowning. And my nephew lives." Viserys had been a mad fool, but Jon Snow, he could be the key. Back in the Riverlands, Robb's war spread like frostbite. His forces crushed another Lannister host at the Red Fork. Jaime remained caged, seething. Catelyn warned her son, "You will have to make hard choices." And he would. Robb sent emissaries to the Vale, to Dorne, to the Reach. Most remained silent. But one man responded. Stannis Baratheon. He had received a copy of Ned's letter, smuggled by a loyal servant. And now his banner rose in Dragonstone. He declared Joffrey a bastard, declared Cersei a traitor, declared himself the true king. The Seven Kingdoms were now 4 kings at war, a wolf, a stag, a lion, and a dragon waiting beyond the sea. And yet, in the middle of it all, Jon Snow wandered the wilds alone. He fled not just the wall, but the world. He came across a village torched by wildlings. He came across a child burned by the cold. He came across a man dying of infection who whispered, "The dead don't sleep anymore." Jon kept walking until he reached the edge of the known world, where snow fell like ashes and silence was thicker than fog. And there, in the cold, he found a sword in the snow, old, black, and cold as death. He took it, and when he turned north, his eyes no longer searched for his name, only for purpose. In King's Landing, the Sept of Baelor stood grand and silent. Cersei entered it alone one night, a bottle in hand. She knelt before the altar and whispered, "Forgive me." But the gods gave no reply, only the sound of distant bells. She thought of burning it down, but that would come later. For now, she drank. That night, a raven from Old Town reached the citadel. The stars were wrong. The winds had changed. Winter was no longer coming. Winter was here, and across the sea Daenerys looked westward. "Tell the captains," she said. "We sail for Westeros." The Game of Thrones had begun anew. The usurper was dead. The wolves had teeth. The lions bled gold and nothing more. The dragons flew. And somewhere, in the shadow of frost and fire, a boy who never asked for a crown now held the weight of a kingdom in his blood. The end. The end.